My parents moved when I was a senior in high school. Not all at once, they moved in stages, and I was allowed to watch the house while they took their things a little at a time to their new house. This was great for me because I had a steady girlfriend and a group of friends who would regularly stay at the house with me. My parents had a huge house, and as long as I didn't wreck it, they didn't really care what I did. As long as I cut the grass and fed the dogs, they sent me money for groceries and let me carry on. It was a very interesting time in my life, and it lasted until I was nearly 20. By the time they were ready to move, my life had kind of fallen apart. My girlfriend had met someone at work, and I caught her cheating and told her that we were done. My friends either started college or started jobs and didn't really have time for hanging out at a friend's house who did nothing but watch his parents home. I saw less and less of them and had less and less company to speak of, so when my parents made me the offer to come with them, I did. There wasn't a lot for me to do in my old town, so I packed up and moved to this place. They had been slowly transitioning into for the last 2 years. The house was actually a lot nicer than the one that they had moved out of. The old house had been big, but it was old and in disrepair. The yard was also pretty large and required a lot of mowing, even in the winter months, given where we lived. The new house was just as big, but had a stone fireplace and hardwood floors and a much smaller yard than the old house. My brother, a few years younger than me, enjoyed the new school, and my parents had moved into new jobs in the community. They told me that it would be much easier for me to start college here, but until then, I could get a job in town to supplement my income. It all sounded fine to me, so I settled into one of the upstairs rooms, and that was where I saw the ghost. Ghost might be too grand a term. It wasn't some spectacular phantasm or some dripping corpse moaning up the halls. It looked like one of the cheap ghosts from a low-budget movie, but it was certainly enough to scare the bejesus out of me. The first couple of nights I spent in the house, I was too tired to do much besides moving my things and falling into bed. The third night, however, was a little different. I had spent the third day in town looking for work and had figured that I was going to have a harder time finding work here than my parents. Unless I wanted to work in retail or fast food, I was going to need to look somewhere else, but that was fine with me. I'd seen on the television that there were a couple of hospitals the next town over, and they were always looking for someone to work in IT or at the switchboard. So that night, I fell into bed, but woke up a little after midnight to a strange sound in my room. My room was huge. It was 12 by 15, with a bed and a desk and a closet, but there was only one window, and it was facing out on the front yard. That time of night, the moon was coming in to light the section of floor where I had laid a rug and a coat rack, and that was where I saw it. At first I thought it might be one of the coats I had hung on the rack, but when it turned, I knew it was something a little different. It looked like a girl, about 15 or 16, made out of TV static. She was looking around, calling for her mother, and hadn't seemed to have noticed me at all. I lay in bed, full of fear and wondering just what the hell was going on, when she suddenly looked at the door, and her sorrow turned into fear. She started to shake, backing away from something, and before she disappeared, she screamed and vanished in a puff of static. It was the strangest thing that I'd ever seen, and as I laid there in bed, I think I convinced myself that I had just imagined it, or it was a dream. I had never had any trouble believing in the paranormal before, but this felt different somehow. This felt like a video or a projection, and I wasn't sure I really believed in it as something other than that. It was just a dream, some trick of the light, nothing more, and I rolled over as I faced the wall and tried to get back to sleep. The next night, however, I woke up around the same time with a tickling feeling on the back of my neck. I was facing the wall that night, sleeping pretty soundly, when all of a sudden it was like insects crawling across my skin. I slapped at my neck, and when I did not get the crunch of an insect, I turned over to check behind me. There she was again, the girl that I had seen the night before. She was standing in roughly the same place and mouthing fearfully at something that I couldn't see. She did this for a minute before turning our way and disappearing again. 2 nights in a row made it a little harder to push away as a dream or my imagination. I took my blanket and went to one of the other bedrooms upstairs, and thankfully I wasn't bothered by ghosts in any of them. I thought about just moving my stuff into one of the other rooms. My parents had said that I could have the old bunk room, but they hadn't said that I had to stay there. Still, I was curious now. This is some kind of mystery, and I really wanted to know how it ended. So the next day, when my mom got up to start cooking breakfast, she found me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Mom, are there any ghosts in this house?" Mom laughed, and that immediately put me at ease. "No, sweetie. The house was only built 20 years ago, and no one has died in it in those 2 decades. Unless you're seeing some kind of ghosts from the land, there certainly aren't any in the house." Some of you may be skeptical, but if my mom said that there's no ghosts in the house, then I believe her. Mom is one of those ghost hunter fanatics. She watches the shows, she goes on ghost tours, and she generally believes in most of the spooky stuff that you see on TV. It's not just that she believes in Bigfoot and aliens, and I'm pretty sure that Mulder is her spirit animal. So, for her to tell me so distinctly that there were no ghosts made me think that I must have been wrong. I must have had a bad dream, like I thought. I decided to go back to the bunk room. It had the best light during the day and the best access to air conditioning, and went about my day as usual. I stayed up a little bit late that night, playing games with some people online and generally goofing off. So when I felt that tickle on the back of my neck again, I looked and saw the ghost girl standing not too far behind me. I nearly fell out of my chair, and some of the language I used probably would have made my parents pretty unhappy. She was still standing there, cringing and talking, but saying nothing. Then, after about 10 to 15 minutes, she disappeared, and I was in an empty room again. When Mom came downstairs that morning and found me at the table again, she laughed loud enough to make my dad ask if she was okay. "What's wrong, kid? Ghosts keeping you up again?" "Kinda," I told her, and I told her what had happened. She listened. Like I said, Mom was really into all the ghost hunting stuff, but after I finished, all she could do was shrug. "I don't know what to tell you. The realtors have to disclose if anyone died in the house, at least for the last 10 years, and I asked. You know me, I've always wanted to live in my own little haunted house, and the lady assured me that no one had died in the home, so no ghosts, though it wasn't for a lack of trying." I thought about that for a moment. Well, what happened to the previous owners of the house? Mom turned her back on me so that she could stir grits and seemed to contemplate how much to tell me. "Well, from what the realtor told us, the family that lived here before us built the house and another house in the valley below it. The down below is technically ours. We just don't know what we're going to do with it yet. There used to be a house down there, but it burned down before the family that built the house moved out." "But what happened to the family?" "She didn't say," Mom said, "but she did tell us that no one had died in the house that anyone was aware of." I thought about it, but realized that she had omitted something. "What about the house that used to be in the down below?" Mom was quiet, and then I guess she decided to stop being so cagey. The family that lived there died in the fire, and the fire was set under some pretty mysterious circumstances. I don't really want to talk about this first thing in the morning. It's kind of a sad topic to start the day with. I decided to let it go for now, but I also thought it might be time to do some research. I had the day off, no applications to put in or financial aid to seek, so I went to the library and decided to see if I could find any information about my parents' new home. There was a little bit in the local paper. It talked about the house fire that had killed the Maynard family, Mr. and Mrs. Maynard and their young daughter, but it didn't mention much else besides the fact that Mr. Maynard had a brother. The article didn't say too much about him, but I suppose that he could have been the one that built the house. There was nothing else in the paper about the incident or occurrences at my parents' house, so I decided it might be time to speak to the source. The small town my parents had moved to was little more than a 2-stoplight town, but they had a small paper that ran the local events and a small bit of local gossip. The town crier had an editor and 2 writers on staff, and when I asked who had done the story about the fire at the Maynard house, they directed me to a man with thick glasses and a tweed jacket. He looked more like an English professor than a column writer, and after shaking my hand and hearing what I was after, he looked like I had force-fed him a lemon. Yes, the Maynard fire was a tragedy, to be sure. Happened almost 10 years ago, and it was one of the first stories I covered. Did you have some questions about it or something? I told him my parents had bought the other house on the lot, and I was looking for information about the previous owners. He took his glasses off and wiped them, but it amounted to the same thing that my mother had told me. He was stalling, trying to figure out the best way to tell me something that he didn't want me to know, and trying to figure out how much of it to tell me so that I would go away. There was more than just a house fire here, and I was beginning to suspect that it was something the town didn't want to talk about. Let me give you a piece of advice. This is one sleeping dog you need to let lie. It happened a long time ago, and the people involved are just trying to get on with their lives. Leave it alone, for the good of those that are still alive. I thanked him for his time and his candor, but I think his warning just made me more interested. I decided to swing by the realty office to talk to the woman who had sold them the house, and they had a few more people than the paper. The realtor, Marjorie, was out, but I told them I'd wait, and after about 20 minutes, she came back and handed the receptionist some papers before the woman pointed me out. Marjorie smiled, but I got the feeling that she didn't really want to talk to me either. You must be one of the new owners of the Maynard place. I hope everything is going well. I assured her that my parents were very happy with the house, but I was looking for a little more info on the place. I lied and told her that I'd found something written on the inside of a closet, and I was just curious about the previous owners. When she asked what I had found, I told her it was gibberish, and I was just wondering if someone was in the occult or something. No, not that I know of. The Maynards left about 6 months after the fire, but their daughter was normal enough from what I remember. So do they still live in town then? I'm sorry, that's not something I'm at liberty to talk about. Regardless, the Maynard family is fine, and I don't think you should bother them if that's what you intend to do. They have suffered a lot after the fire, and they'd rather be left in peace. She seemed to realize that she had said too much after she finished and excused herself, saying that she needed to get back to work. I left the realty company, feeling like I'd taken 1 step forward and 5 steps back. I had more questions than answers, but I was really wondering if I could get to the bottom of this. Ghost girls aside, this mystery had its hooks in me, and I felt like the town had a vested interest in keeping something a secret. I headed back to the library, trying to find the threads again, and that's when I remembered what the writer had said. He said the fire had happened about 10 years ago, and the realtor had said they moved out of the house less than a year later. If the Maynard kids had gone to school around here, maybe I could find something with those dates and years. It was vague, and it made me feel a little creepy, but it was all I had to run with. It took a while, and I think the librarian thought I was a weirdo, but I finally discovered something. A news article about a local fundraiser had made me feel cold as a picture of the students involved scuttled across. It was the 4-H Club's annual farm auction, something they did in the spring. Now, one of the smiling girls was hugging a lamb and looking into the camera with frozen joy. It was the same girl from my nightly haunting, and the name underneath gave me a name to go along with the face. Stacy Maynard, 15, poses with her prized winning lamb, Chumley. The realtor had let it slip that they lived in town, so a quick search of the yellow pages, and I discovered that she had been right. She was still in town, living in the Masterly Hedge apartments. And after Googling the address, I worried over the idea of talking to her. Everyone else in town had turned me down cold when I kept up my questions, so who knew what this woman would say when I asked her? I tapped my pen as I looked at the address. finally deciding to give it a shot. What did I have to lose, right? She was out on her porch when I pulled up, the little patio off the side of the apartment, holding quite a few plants. She was watering them, her blonde hair sticking out the back of her baseball cap, and she looked up as I approached. She looked a lot like the girl from my room, the way a mother might look like their child, and I think she saw something on my face as she asked if she could help me. She looked like the realtor and the writer, polite, but apprehensive. I was hoping to talk to you about something. It's going to sound strange, but you've been haunting my house. She raised an eyebrow at me, laughing nervously. That's a new one, but it's still a pretty sloppy pickup line. No, I'm sorry, I'm making a mess of this. Did you used to live at 563 Sorora Street? That seemed to make her nervous. Yeah? Why? My family lives there now. I stay in the upstairs room, the one with the window facing the front of the house, and every night there's a ghost girl that looks a lot like you. She stays for a few minutes, she never says anything, and then she disappears. The longer I went on, the less impressed the woman looked. Uh-huh. Okay, well, I think it's time for you to go now. This is all very interesting, but I'm not really interested in whatever this is. She started to go back inside, and I tried my best to find something to prove I wasn't just being a creep. The girl looks like she's about 15, and she looks terrified. She keeps calling for her mother while she watches the door. She looks absolutely terrified. I just wanted to know why she was so scared. She had been halfway through the door, but she stopped, and she turned around to look at me. How do you know that? No one would be able to know that. I was by myself that night, but she shook her head, realizing what she had said. She stood there for a moment, contemplating what to do with this stranger that had wandered up all of a sudden, before finally deciding to invite me in. Sit here on the porch, she said, as she headed inside. I'm going to get tea. I feel like I need something stronger, and I'm out of everything but cooking sherry. I parked it on one of the plastic chairs that she had on the porch, and when she came back with a jug of tea and 2 glasses, I thanked her. You aren't the first person to come to talk to me. What happened was a town secret, but there were definitely people who wanted the real story. I swore I'd never talk about it again, but it kind of feels like you're part of this, and that's not your fault. So I'm going to tell you what happened, and when I'm done, I don't want to talk about it again. Do you understand? After this, I don't want to talk about this ever again. I nodded, taking a sip of tea as she emptied her own glass and refilled it. Okay, so my dad and my uncle got the land from my grandpa. They had shared it, and my uncle wanted to build his house in the valley, while Daddy wanted to put a house on the hill. They were co-owners in a moving company, and they were doing pretty well. They were close, thick as thieves, but they couldn't have been more different. My uncle was a loving man, affectionate and supportive, but Daddy was a monster. He made life hell for my sister and my mother, but especially for me. I was his oldest daughter, and I seemed to get the brunt of his anger. He beat us. He yelled at us. He did... She closed her eyes and shook a little. Other things to us, but we were all too scared to say anything to anyone. But that's not why you're here, though. But I guess it is, too. That moment you're talking about was one of the last times he hurt me. The time before someone did something about it. She looked at the tea glass, watching the ice cubes rattle around before continuing. Daddy and my uncle were fighting a lot before he died. He found out that Daddy had been taking money from the business, and he wanted him to give it back. Daddy refused, but my uncle had threatened to turn him into the police or something. I heard only snippets of their fight, or fights over the phone, that I only got one part of. But one night, Daddy decided to do something about it. I remember waking up to see my uncle's house burning, but I think I knew he was already dead. Daddy had killed him, killed my aunt and my cousin too, and I think the town knew it too. They couldn't prove it. Daddy had covered his tracks, but they remembered when he was younger, and they knew he was a monster when he grew up to be a bigger monster. They had seen the bruises on my mother and on us, and they had seen the animals dumped in the gutter near his house sometimes, and they knew it couldn't go on much longer. Then one night, he gave them their reason. Mom was at work. I'd come home early from a 4-H event, and Daddy was waiting for me. He asked what I'd been doing, asked why I was out so late, and when I told him, he called me a liar and a lot of other things. He tried to put his hands on me, and I had a momentary lapse in sanity. Maybe not. Maybe I just had had enough of being beaten, but regardless, I pulled away and ran upstairs. I slammed the door, pushed the dresser in front of it, and just screamed for my mother. I was terrified of what I had done. I knew that when he got inside, he was going to really let me have it this time. He was going to beat me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I called out for my mom. I begged her to come home and save me, but when the door opened with a crash, I couldn't do anything but hunker against the wall and accept my punishment. It wasn't punishment, though. It was just violence. I think that was when I realized that he was never actually punishing me, never delivering anything for my own good, and I slipped into unconsciousness. That didn't stop him, though. I woke up in the hospital, my mom crying as she told me how sorry she was, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again. I found out later that she had come home to find me unconscious. My dad was downstairs watching TV like nothing had happened, while I lay in a puddle of blood and fought for my life. She called an ambulance, and the police had been called, and my daddy was arrested. They took him to jail, and he claimed that he had done nothing. They had no proof that he had beaten me, no more proof than they had that he had burned down my uncle's house and killed his family. But the people of the town were tired of suffering him. While I was in the hospital, a mob came to the house and took him away. I don't know what they did to him, and I don't want to know, but he never bothered us again. He'd killed his brother and gotten away with it, and he'd beaten his wife and children for years, and they had ignored it. But putting me in the hospital seemed to be their tipping point. So that's what happened. I don't know why you can see it, but that was the moment that caused it. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves and the potted plants whisper. And when I thanked her for the tea, I took my leave. To this day, I don't know why the girl appears in the room every night, but knowing what brought it on, I also don't much care. I've been back to visit Miss Maynard a few times since, and we've become pretty good friends. I also moved my stuff into the room across the hall, and I'm happy to report that no phantoms take up residence in there, at least not that I've found. I don't know if the wood in the room is so porous that it soaks up memories, or if what happened that night was so terrible that it made an impression, but the girl, to my knowledge, still appears around midnight before disappearing. I've slept sounder since I moved across the hall, and I have no intention of moving back.
You're still here. Thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague here. Always a pleasure to see all my new and old viewers coming by for another one of my spooky tales. If you'd like to support the show, you can always take part in one of our channel offers through Fume or Aura, or you can just click on another video when they come up. I'd really appreciate it. For our newer viewers, we also have lots of playlists and other things if you'd like to get caught up. I know some of my series have been going on for quite a while. If you'd like to get my latest book, there's a link down below that'll take you to my Amazon page. Towesey Homestead just came out, so if that's something you'd like to get your hands on, go ahead and have a look down there. If you'd like a signed copy, you can go ahead and email me from my email address on the site, and I'll get with you about shipping information and ship you a signed copy. If you'd like to support the channel in a more monetary fashion, we also have membership through YouTube, and we've got a Patreon that you can get the information for in the description. We have lots of tiers and everything to suit your needs. Patrons that support on the $10 tier, that's our Ghostly Reader tier, get a book anytime I write one, signed and on their doorstep. As you may have noticed, there's a list of patrons and members on the screen, and I'd like to personally thank every one of them for taking a hand in the future of this channel. Well, that's enough for tonight. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.